up off the ground. Save yourself. We are prisoners to regret when we replay mistakes over and over again.
Hey, Shane here. Thanks so much for tuning in to Liberty Under Attack Radio. I've got a very special and quite spontaneous interview for you today. The guest is Merrick VanLandingham from the RadicaLogic Podcast. First off, I get his thoughts on the occupation of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge by the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom group. He mentioned he had been following the developing situation. I'm always curious to hear other anarchist perspectives, as they tend to vary greatly from the constitutionalists that I still speak to, as they very well should. Throughout the rest of the show, I get his thoughts on jury nullification and state nullification, as we come at them from very, very different perspectives. Nonetheless, it was a great discussion, and Merrick certainly has a lot to offer. But before I turn you over to our conversation, Liberty Under Attack is covered by a BIPCOT no government license. This allows reuse by anyone except for governments or their agents. Learn more at bipcot.org. Now, this is a longer interview, so I will close out the introduction here. I'll be back after to provide some closing thoughts. Please enjoy. I'm joined by Merrick VanLandingham from the RadicaLogic Podcast. You can find his work at RadicaLogicPodcast.com, and there's only one L, so that's RadicaLogic Podcast.com. So Merrick, welcome to Liberty Under Attack Radio, sir. How are you doing this evening?
I am vertical, sir. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're vertical. I haven't heard that one before. What's that mean?
It's the best you get out of me. I'm still standing.
Fair enough. Okay, that makes sense. Good deal. So you're one of the hosts on the RadicaLogic Podcast with Jonathan. What are you guys doing over there? What are you guys talking about? What's the goal? Tell us a bit about it.
Well, the goal initially was to take on the subjects that were verboten in polite society. We talk about the things that are the hidden underbelly of realpolitik and really parse them out piece by piece by using logic instead of just biased rhetoric or anything else. We're slicing through your confirmation bias like a Ginsu knife, and we try to make each other as uncomfortable as we can in discussing these topics so that we are 100% sure that when we're done, that we have cut right down to the quick and are looking at any given thing objectively. For instance, we've done several shows on police action in the United States. We've done stuff on Islam. We've done stuff on the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem, nationalism in general. It's not an anti-American show. It's just trying to look at things through a different lens.
Yeah. Okay. Very. And you kind of raised my curiosity there. I had, and this was right. This was when I guess the constitutionalists were. It was right after the Chattanooga shooting, I think it was, when they were all up in arms about Islam, and so in response to that, and I actually had constitutionalists listening to my show at that time, so I said, why not hear it from the Muslims? So I interviewed Davi Barker and then soon after Will Coley to get their thought. I mean, hear it straight from the horse's mouth, and they didn't like that too much. They didn't like that. They were not objective to it at all. The chat at FPRN was just filled with hatred. It was filled. I mean, I don't. What's the term called? Where they lie to the infidels or whatever it is. Oh God, I can't remember what it's called. But when either one of them would explain their position or explain things historically or biblically or whatever it was, they would. Well, he's lying. They're required to lie to us as Christians. So I guess, what have you kind of dug into when it's come to Islam?
Well, that was one of the first shows that we did. I am coming at this from a bit of a unique perspective, I suppose, because I have lived in Muslim countries off and on over the years, and my wife is from a Muslim country. So, and many of my friends, even from back in college, I was a member of the International Student Association, and many of my friends were Muslim. So I do feel that I have a bit of an insight into it. And it seems like there's either a black or a white. That's the perspective that you get, either from the media or from just anybody off the street. That, yeah, there's a few, it's kind of like cops. Yeah, most of them are okay. But man, there's some bad ones, and they just want to kill you, and they want to kill your family, and they hate gays, and they want Sharia law, which, by the way, is kind of a misnomer because Sharia kind of means law or path. So it's like saying they really want law.
And from what I gathered with Sharia law, it's much like ecclesiastical law insofar as it only applies to, I guess, to Muslims. That's what I gathered from it.
No, that actually you're correct there. It really is kind of a self-guiding past. And I think where people are missing the boat on that is that, and I love watching folks quoting out of the Quran and showing how evil and nasty and they hate their women and they lock them up and they beat their children and they kill their children and they do all of these nasty things and they'll lie to you and they're the most despicable people. And I'm like, have you ever read the Old Testament?
Yeah, no joke. No joke. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I mean, and it's called taqiyya, by the way. I just can't remember what it was called.
Taqiyya. Okay. Thank you.
Deception and lying. In
Yeah.
Islam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Where Muhammad says that you have a duty to lie to the infidels. But I'm like, okay, well, have you ever read Genesis? Let's talk about Abraham. Literally, God telling him to raise a knife and kill your son. And he's going to do it. And right at that point where the knife point is coming down, he's like, nah, playa, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Do we take those things as, and if you are a Christian or not, but does anyone take those things seriously anymore? And I would say that no, we take them as parables as they are, which really is what they are. But we hold a different standard to Muslims and to the Quran, but that's mainly because we've been taught to hate them. Why have we been taught to hate them? Well, because they are the they're the mujahideen that are the evil ones, and they are Al-Qaeda, and they are Al-Nusra, and they are ISIS. And then I have to say, stop right there. Let me ask you, for every one of those groups, from whom are they being funded? From where is the money coming? And what is the ultimate objective? Let's start the story in the beginning. We don't need to start the story in the middle. And that's where it starts to fall apart. And that's what we do. We take everything back to the genesis of, well, that tied in pretty well.
Yeah, it worked well.
We take it down to the genesis of what the story is and then start from there, and you end up getting a little bit of a different perspective. Maybe you see things differently than the way you've been told.
Right on, and I think it sounds like you're kind of starting things from it kind of sounds like the trivia method quite a bit to me. You're starting at I guess you're starting at first principles, the grammar, and you're working up through the logic and then the rhetoric, and through it to gain a better understanding, rather than just taking what's delivered by mainstream media or by these non-governmental organizations that have a vested interest in the military-industrial complex or whatever, and you start down there at the basics and you work your way up to gain a better understanding of these subjects. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's absolutely accurate. The trivia method and the quadrivium is absolutely what we apply to everything. You cannot have a good argument without understanding the grammar. And I can't tell you how much it did for me once I learned how that works. It made all of the little dots connect. It made all the little puzzle pieces fit together. And that is kind of the basis for rational debate.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really missing, I think, in modern society, especially among people my age. I don't know how old you are. I'm 40, and most of my peers do not understand anything about how to debate. They just understand how to back up their confirmation bias, and they spew epithets and ad hominems, and that's just the way it goes. And I'm like, well, nope, I'm not learning anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's that obviously comes through. I think it with any education, not schooling, but with any education, I think the trivia method is the first thing that should be taught. And obviously, I had on Daryl Becker to for the direct action series to discuss nonviolent communication and the trivium, but we start with the trivium, and just the way that he kind of explains the trivium method in in a practical sense. I mean, that should be something that is children already kind of use I mean, you kind of grow up with those skills, but when you actually and that's something I noticed too when I first learned about the trivia method, it was like, wow, now I know what I've been doing. I got something to put to it, and now that I have I guess a template, so to speak, I can check anytime I look into anything, I can always just go through the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric, and make sure that the conclusions I come to are true as far as the information that I have currently. And obviously, there's always room for new evidence to either change or alter conclusions and things of that nature. But yeah, the trivia method has been very, very crucial to me as well. How'd you find out about the trivia method, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Becker. He's wonderful on this. He's the one who really explained it to my friend Nick Hazelton.
That's where I found out about him too. Okay, well, thank you, Nick.
And I ended up doing 2 episodes with Nick on education because I'm a home educator. I've been involved in education for 20 years, and he really brought a lot of light to that to me. And I said, man, that's really interesting. And so I applied that to the process that I use, because this is the problem I've always had is you can talk to anybody and they say, oh, well, yeah, I'm a thinker. And you can ask them. You can be rhetorical. You can say, okay, well, what's your process? Oh, well, I'm a critical thinker. Yeah, okay, got that. What's your process? Well, I think critically. I think. I'm like, no. That's not what I'm talking about. And so when we start getting into the processes of thought and how learning occurs, when I start talking about primacy and recency and repetition and as you've mentioned, grammar and logic and rhetoric, people really get lost. They're like, I don't know anything about that, man. I just think. And I'm like, there is a science to this.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true, and it's really this ties in very perfectly with was it last Sunday this last Thursday show at Liberty Under Attack Radio. I had Daryl on, and also Stephanie Murphy. We were talking some things about science, and Daryl brought up a really, really good point. And obviously we were talking about some controversial things within science, but one thing he emphasized was, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Can you walk through how you came to that conclusion, I guess, concisely and logically? And he said, when people can't do that, I mean, the 3 F's, the fight, flee, or freeze. You see one of those responses typically, and when you get to that point, they understand that wow, I don't know how I came to this conclusion. That's a good question. So yeah, you're exactly right. Walking through those steps, and obviously knowing it as when I discovered the trivia method. Knowing the actual process of that, where I can look to that and understand like what step I'm in with whatever subject, it's really, really helped me to firm up on my conclusions.
It really does. It helps you lock in how you got to where you are, and it will save you from making those mistakes where you make an assumption somewhere in the middle, and then everything beyond that runs off of that false assumption, that false dichotomy, whatever it may be. And I had to learn late in life, and I'm not coming off as some expert on this. I've recently learned this. I'm just like everybody else. I've made lots of mistakes, and I've thought a lot of wrong things. I mean, Jesus Christ, I voted for Mitt Romney. Come on, cut me some slack. but at
That,
least
that was that
I
was that
keep.
was the only election I ever voted in. I was 19 or 20 at the time. I was the only election, and I canceled my voter registry. Yeah, but yeah.
Right. And I've done all of the bad things, and I've been the conservative and the minarchist and all of the things, and it literally took me a lot of years of thought to get to where I am today, and I'm not at my destination. I'm still on the journey. So,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So let's talk about that. I mean, I find it very intriguing to hear people's story on how they actually came to anarchism and voluntarism and things like that. There's always a very unique story. So I don't know, why don't you briefly tell us how you got to where you are today with your thinking.
oh, sure. That one's actually pretty easy. Um, I was a very strict constitutionalist for a number of years back in my late 30s. And to the point that I took college courses from Hillsdale, and I was carrying around pocket constitutions. I was handing them out. I could quote, parts of it and out of the Federalist number 45 and the Anti-Federalist Papers, and our font, as Lou calls them, the fondling fathers. How they had this divine intervention to create the most perfect document ever, and things never added up 100%. So I always found myself having to defend things that did not, 1 + 1 did not equal 2. And, it was a constant struggle. I always figured, well, you're either a constitutionalist or you're some red diaper doper baby communist, hipster that you should move to Somalia, right? Oh yeah, I was one of those guys. And but it never added up to me. And I'll tell you what the impetus was for me is my whole family has. I'm sorry, I'm banging on my mic here so that you guys can hear that. That's bad audio. I talk with my hands. I'm like a Jewish mother. Pretty much everyone in my family has fought in one war or another, and so they're all war heroes, right? And they all come home from
same here.
World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, ad nauseum. And all of the stories that I grew up hearing did not necessarily jive with the history that I knew, the revisionist history, not what I got in government school, but the revisionist history. So a few years ago, I took a dive into the deep end of the history pool and started looking at real history from primary sources. And I'll tell you this, I realized that I had been lied to about everything. All of my narrative that was fueling my nationalism was based on, I'll be kind and say, shaky ground.
Yeah.
And it made me very angry because I was so invested. There's nothing that you can do to a man that's worse than challenging his religion. And that statism, that nationalism had really become my religion. And it challenged that. And I wanted to prove it wrong. But guess what? I couldn't, because history is as history is. It's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. And once I looked at that and I realized that I had been lied to my entire life, I was so mad. I said, never, ever, ever again. I'm going to turn over every leaf. I'm going to look at every detail of everything that you guys have ever told me, and I'm going to find out what's true.
Yeah.
And so for about the past 5 or 6 years, that's pretty much what I do for a hobby. And I have basically upturned all of it and spent all of my free time trying to explain to people what I found.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I obviously went through public schooling, and when I was about 19, I watched. I guess I was a conspiracist first off. That's kind of what I started out as, conspiracist constitutionalist. And I went to sovereign citizen. Unfortunately, I've made it many times in the podcast. It's not something new. And sovereign citizen, I was a constitutionalist. Pre 13th Amendment folk. or pre the first 13th Amendments, first 13 amendments. That's all you need, and you got a good government or whatever the argument they like to make. And then
Right.
and then after I got out of the sovereign citizen stuff, I was kind of I was searching. I was still consider myself a constitutionalist, but anarchy will be chaos. And then I started learning about anarchism, and I said, hey, this is a lot more rational than any of the other stuff I've been told. So yeah, once I got out of high school, I'm in college right now, unfortunately. Just what I got to do, but I essentially go there to write my Adventures in Illinois Higher Education series and expose the communism. Fortunately, there have been a lot of editions this semester, but there's already about 20 editions at this point, so I think the communism has already been exposed. But nonetheless, I mean, yeah, I'm right there with you. Once I got out of high school, and I kind of realized that what I was being told wasn't correct. Yeah, that's what I've been doing the past I don't know, 4 years myself or so, trying to actually figure out what was the truth. And I came from a family, I mean, not as far back as World War I don't think, but both of my grandparents were in World War II, and I don't remember a whole lot of war stories from either of them. I know when one of my grandpas was he was kind of going towards his death. My dad sat down and recorded some conversation with him, and he didn't like talking about it. He got really emotional with some of the stuff that he saw there. So it's no surprise that his wife, my grandma, and I actually still have it. Have you ever read None Dare Call It a Conspiracy by Gary Allen?
I've heard of that one. Sorry, my audio cut for a second. I've heard of that, but I haven't read it.
It's a great book. But yeah, it's over there on my bookshelf. It was my grandma's book. Yeah, it's very, very accurate, I will say. So I think she was kind of along the same line of thinking that I was, but she didn't have access to all the things that I have access to. But yeah, I find it very interesting to kind of hear about the past, and I see a lot of overlap. But I don't know. I don't know. It's always very interesting to hear those different stories. But I want to get into just a little bit. Before we did this show, you mentioned that you've been following along with the Bundy thing, and I just got done doing a podcast on that actually, and just curious. I like to hear fellow anarchist thoughts on this because they're far different from the constitutionalist ones I see on a daily basis. But what are your thoughts on the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom occupation of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge?
Well, here's the dichotomy. I thought that it was a wonderful thing that they did because before anybody starts hurling stones at my windows, I really thought that they were exposing that fallacy of the tragedy of the commons. That we all collectively own this land, but they're, as Orwell said, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so, yeah, we just claim this land. And my question becomes, okay, by what authority? Well, because we're the government. We are the state. And these guys go in there like, hey, we're going to use it. This is our property, essentially. This is collective property, right? No, it's not. That in itself was pretty interesting, but the response was much more interesting. And it really was an introspect into the idea of how the state views itself as this omnipotent and omnipresent being, that they are everything. When I call the United States fascist, people get angry because words. Well, I'm like, yeah, okay, but words matter. Who came up with the term fascism? It was Benito Mussolini. He coined the damn term. He should be able to define what it means. What did he say? He said everything within the state, nothing without the state. His words. And that's what I saw at Malheur, and that's what I saw basically at the Bundy Ranch to begin with, is that the state assumes the authority that, you see this piece over here? That's ours. I'm like, how can that be ours? I thought we were the government. It's of the people, right? No. We don't mean that. We mean that's ours, not yours. Ours.
Yeah, that's the government. That's not the
right. It's the government,
the public at large. Yeah.
But aren't we the government? And they're like, Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and that's where the ad hominems start to come out. But yeah, I guess the main issue with and I mean, yeah, even constitutionalists disagree with this, and that'll come out in the podcast before this one. But even constitutionalists disagree about the land arguments when it comes to these things. But essentially, what was going on there was apparently the land was illegal. It was never ceded to the federal government, so therefore it's Oregon. It's the state of Oregon's. So it's still a public lands argument. It's still terrible. It's still terrible. It's still a tragedy of the commons. They just want the tragedy of the commons more localized. So it's. I mean, I really, I don't. I really, really like their bravery, and they're falling on their sword per se. Well, luckily, some of them are the 7 aren't going to go to prison, thankfully. But yeah, I applaud their courage. But
But
yeah,
they're doing it wrong.
yeah, the conclusions they have come to, I would say, are incorrect. And I'm sure you noticed this too. But a lot of it was religious as well as constitutional. It's like, God told us that we need to do this.
Yeah, it's
And
very
not,
religious.
I'm not, I'm not against that at all. But when it comes to things like that, it's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, for one thing, I respect their religious beliefs.
Of
Be
course.
I religious or not, and to this day, no one, including my wife, knows what my religious beliefs are. So that's irrespective of that. Yeah, they take the tack that, okay, well, your house is flooding and you're on the roof, and somebody comes with a boat, and you say, no, God's going to take care of me. It's that argument. You're like, okay, well, what if God sent the boat? All right, come on, get in the boat, dumbass. But that aside, it's all about their religion. They're very religious in the Christian faith, but they're also very religious in the state faith.
True. Yes. And
If
that's the one that's most important.
if you remember what happened during the standoff, who showed up and who were the armed protesters that were showing up on CNN and Fox News every night? Well, it was your Oath Keepers and your 3%ers and your ranchers carrying
you mean the Oath Breakers and the 3-inchers? But yes, go ahead.
Right. Yes. Okay. Thank you for correcting my grammar on that. And all the ranchers with their pocket constitutions and things of that nature. And I'm like, guys, and they're waving the flag, they're waving the Gadsden flag and the American flag, and I'm like, you are literally waving the flag of your oppressor in their face. And I don't think you've identified what the problem is. Once again, the grammar, I don't think that you have started at the beginning. You're starting the story right in the middle. You're just like the Shays'ites who fought against the government in Shays Rebellion, waving the flag. You're just like the Whiskey Rebellion. We talked about this before we went on air.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. At least David Koresh had the freaking fortitude to just say, I'm not worshiping any of that. I'm a crazy ass cultist, and I may have my own flag, but I'm not worshiping yours while you fly it on your MRAP or your M1A Abrams tank and come blow my stuff up. And that's, I think, where they're missing the boat. And they say, well, we're going to trust in the legal system to exonerate us of all wrongdoing. And once again, you're going to go into the system of your oppressors to try to get rectification for your just actions. Because did they initiate force against anyone? No, they did not. Did they break the nap? I know this is a big, libertarian thing, big anarchist thing. Did they violate the nap? No, they did not. But they're going about it in a way that still gives that basic religious faith to the state, and that's where I have a problem.
They're still practicing in the rituals, yeah, and I guess fortunately, I don't know how it happened. I remember right when this started, I was following it. It was January of this year. I followed it pretty much throughout. There's a YouTube channel dedicated, or a YouTube playlist dedicated to it on the LUA channel, and then all of the court documents and all of that stuff. I mean, I was following this really closely. Went on Louis B's Crotch Shot Radio, and Kyle and I did, and we went on for 4 hours there and discussed it. And our conclusion at it was probably February. It's like, yeah, they're going to get arrested. I mean, if they aren't killed, they're going to go to prison for a long time. Somehow they didn't. And
well, all but one of them. I mean, you can't say the same thing for Lavoy Finicum, but
true. And there were some that pled out too, so they're going to go to prison. But the seven most recently, yeah, they got a non guilty verdict. But yeah, Finicum, yeah, he's dead. There's no not guilty verdict for him, unfortunately. Yeah, that was not good.
Yeah, I hear he put in for it and they denied it to bring him back to life.
Yeah.
He was murdered, and it was all caught on camera. And I don't know what you think about it. We have not talked about this, but I do not believe that there is any justification for what happened to him. And I've looked at it 6 ways from Sunday. If you have something that can change my mind, like I said, everything that I say is a question, not a statement. So I'm always open to be corrected. But based on what I've seen, I don't get it. I think he was just shot down in cold blood. But what's your take on that? Now, here's what I do. I take over your show, and now I'm interviewing you.
That's fine. That's fine. But yeah, I watched. I did a lot with those videos. I looked at a bunch of them. One thing I can ascertain is that what he did was to try to draw fire away from that car, or I guess that's the story. He got out of the car so the guns would be aimed at him rather than like the child in the back seat.
That's correct.
That's I guess that's what I can say for sure. There are a lot of conspiracies going around, or there were a lot of conspiracies. I think it's kind of over now, but there were a lot of conspiracies about. Oh, his gun was left back at the refuge, whatever. There's no way he could have been reaching for a gun. Whatever it was, I'm honestly not sure, and I don't think we'll ever know. The footage we have is from I think, Oregon State Police. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. What I do know for sure, though, is that I guess the official story, he was getting out of the vehicle to draw fire away from the car. I don't know, and I'm okay with saying I don't know, because I wasn't there.
No, it's fine. I wasn't there either. All I have is the same information you have, so
yeah,
it's all speculation.
Yeah, it's really hard, and I don't know. I don't mind making speculative statements like that, but with that one, I mean, God, I'm friends with a lot of especially after the court documents archive I put together, and all of the friend requests I got from constitutionalists, which most have probably deleted me by now once they found out I was an anarchist. But just all of the speculation, I think they've done my speculation for me. So there's no reason for me to do any of that. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. Definitely interesting situation, and I hope they find their logical conclusions soon, and I guess stop their advocacy for the exact thing that brought them to the position that they're in now. So, I don't know. Any final thoughts on that?
No, I just realized that I've taken you so far off on a tangent that it's going to take you probably 5 minutes to get back to what you wanted to do to begin with.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's only like three sub, and yeah, we're gonna hit our we've already hit our 30-minute mark. So yeah, it's definitely fine. But I think this will probably be the subject that'll take us to the conclusion, because I've got some opinions on this subject, and I've written about it before. In brief, but I've written about it. But you mentioned before the show that you're in favor of state nullification. So for the listeners that may not know what that is, why don't you define it and then kind of I guess lay out your position on that.
Well, it's pretty simple, really. Without going into the weeds, nullification is a tool that can be used by state. I'll just stick with that, by state entities against the federal government under both the 9th and 10th Amendments, mainly under the 10th, that any action, any rule, any law that is not specifically delegated to the federal government under the Constitution can effectively be nullified, which means rendered useless on the state level. So, for instance, let's take I don't know, pick one,
Well,
Colorado.
there was a Obamacare. I know some states were trying to state nullify that when that was when that was being handed down, I guess.
Yeah, several states have tried that. None have done so effectively. They have with the cannabis issue. Look at, I guess it's Oregon or Colorado or some of the other states on the cannabis thing have done that, where they just legalized it. And essentially what that means is they tell the feds that, hey, if you want to enforce your own federal laws, you can do it, but you're not going to do it with our resources. And you can do it through the justice I'm sorry, I said justice system. It's not justice. The legal system. A little faux pas there. By having a jury just say, well, I understand what your law says, but it's bunk and we don't believe in it, so not guilty. It can happen any number of ways, but effectively it's a way for the people of any given jurisdiction to say that we do not recognize the validity of this edict or act or law or ordinance or whatever it is that's coming down from on high within K Street. And therefore, hey, you want to go bust a guy for a gram of weed in my town? You better bring in your own people, because we're not going to do it. And that's about as simple as I can make it.
Okay. I guess the way that I guess the way I understood state nullification, like in regards to I don't know, getting the state government in a position to actually do that. For obviously, but I'll just use Illinois as an example. I mean, it's been I think Chicago, like the counties in Chicago, have finally done something where, like, we're not going to prosecute you for less than this amount of marijuana. But they really haven't nullified any federal laws. They've expanded them to where they have magazine limits and things of that nature. But the way that I understand it is that, like, let's say I wanted to, I don't know, do some state nullification here in Illinois. I would have to, I don't know, go and talk to some folks that I think would support my position on we'll say legalization of marijuana. Just like Colorado is probably the simplest. I have to talk to them. We'd have to lobby, or we'd have to I don't know, get their campaigns up and running for whatever position they're running for. I don't know, Illinois Senate or whatever. And then we have to lobby and get our people in there too, so that we have some of our pro marijuana people there in Springfield. And then we'd have to go and vote to make sure those folks got in. And then we have to probably do some more lobbying and pay off some folks that don't initially support our position, but with some money they probably would. But that's kind of the I guess the way that I viewed state nullification, I guess, from a grassroots sort of way. So I guess am I correct? Am I incorrect?
No, you're correct, but I'm just saying that it can be much simpler than that. It can be as simple as a grassroots effort for people to, when I say lobby, doesn't necessarily mean sending money. It just means making some phone calls or writing letters or whatever. And I'm not a statist, so I'm not advocating any of this. I'm just trying to explain it. But getting your local leadership to ignore what the federal rules are. And, the cannabis thing is the easiest one to explain, but it can be done under other auspices of let's say, the Real ID Act, that the federal government is now threatening the states, saying that, well, if you don't comply, rather, with this Real ID Act by 2018, then the people who don't have that biometric ID will not be allowed to fly domestically.
Yeah, Illinois is one of the last ones on the boat for that. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, I held out as long as I could on it, but it can be that simple. Now, that is fraught with peril if you are a state legislator, because what happens is the Fed, not the Fed, the feds hold funding over your head like the sword of Damocles. And this is where I go back to starting the story at the beginning, that they steal your money at gunpoint and then sell it back to you for compliance and obedience.
Yes, what you're explaining is it's a term coined by Gary Hunt. It's called greenmail, where the feds take the money and then they distribute it back out to the states that I guess obey with their demands, and if they don't obey, they don't get the funding. That's just how it is.
That's correct, and no state can afford to have their federal funds withheld from them for their highway projects. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars just over something as simple as cannabis, or kratom, or I hate to keep using drugs as an analogy, but pick something. Common Core, there's a good one. Something as simple as that. To have your federal funds removed from your state for your education system, do you know how fast you would be sent out on your butt as an elected official if you got your federal funds cut off for government education?
Oh God, you wouldn't have another term, that's for sure.
No, you'd be at the bar by happy hour because you didn't have a job anymore.
Yeah.
So that's how that works. So it really takes people with some stones. And if I can, I want to give a plug to Matt Kibbe of the 10th Amendment Center for really being the sole voice on nullification. And I don't mean jury nullification. I mean just state nullification in general. He has done more for that purpose than probably anyone in the history of the United States. And he's done it on a zero budget. I mean, I give him as much money as I can every month, but they don't have a lot of dough. But they are really having big effects on very little money. And I know that you wanted to get into jury nullification, and that's something that's a little bit different. But just on the principle of nullification, I think that every single person out there who is anybody who's read Harvey Silverglate's 3 Felonies a Day should understand that they are a criminal. If you're listening to this, if you are breathing, if you can fog a mirror, you are a felon. You are a criminal. Ayn Rand said it 100 years ago. When they run out of criminals, they'll just make more laws. Well, I've asked that question before. I'm like, how many laws are there on the books? Nobody knows.
Yeah. It's
They're like, I don't know. It's a shit ton.
If someone were to actually go through and actually count them, I think they might perish before they can get done counting them. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
So there's that, and I don't mean to wax poetic and keep talking your ear off, but that's just something that shows you who's in power. Now, if we want to turn this one loose, I want to say one more thing real quick.
Please do. Yeah, go for it.
Everybody that does understand, not everybody, most people that do understand the importance and the power of nullification on the state level, they seem to drop it right there. And that's where I pick it back up. I'm like, nope, wait a minute. That's not the end all be all. That is not the solution. This federalism is not the solution, because if you look at all of the tyranny that is imposed on you on a daily basis, most of it actually comes from the local level. Yes, it does. When you're pulled over,
nuisance abatements. Your city cops. Exactly. The ordinances. Exactly.
All your little ordinances. Your state police who are going to pull you over for doing 75 and a 70. Your little tag violations. That's a state thing. Your grass is too high. That's a city thing. Your sales tax report wasn't exactly correct. That's a state thing. All of these, here I go again, hitting my mic. All of these things are done on the local level. So just by saying that the solution is to drag the power away from the federal government and bring it down to a local level is absolutely incomplete. That does not work. Yeah. Anyway, that's the end of my little diatribe there.
Good deal. It was good to kind of it was good to hear you hear you explain that. It definitely was. But I guess the last thing we're coming up about 44 minutes, and I think we'll keep this to an hour. But I guess jury nullification. We discussed that before the show, and I laid out my position, which is simply obviously here at LUA we promote a lot of direct action, things you can take the initiative to do in your own life right now without asking for permission. And with jury nullification, obviously you have to wait until the government summons you. It could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, it could be never. But yeah, you have to wait on the government. And then secondly, you have to hope that the case you're on is one of which is a victimless crime. So the issue I have with jury nullification, the reason I don't promote it at all, is because the variables are all out of your control. This is not something you can pick up and do tomorrow, unless you're going to take the route of pamphleting outside of courthouses and risk being tossed in jail, which I don't advocate. Agorism's on the freedom umbrella of direct action. Obviously, there's some risk to that too. There are always risks to everything. But going and I guess poking the bear is essentially what someone is doing when they're going and pamphleting. So I don't recommend that either. But that's really the only way you can take the initiative when it comes to jury nullification. So that's my position on that. And you kind of had an interesting perspective on that. So why don't you go ahead and kind of lay that out so the listeners can hear that.
Well, sure. Once again, people need to understand that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a voluntarist, not a statist. So when I'm called for jury duty, my civic duty, I don't see it as such. But what I do see it as is an opportunity to throw a sabot into the gears of the state. They have their system, they have their legal system, and they're going to use it to the best of their ability. Now, the way they do that, and I've sat in courtrooms, and trust me, I've been thrown in jail 6 times, and I've been in courtrooms with friends of mine who are activists probably more times than that. It's a rigged game, and there is nothing that you can do. There is nothing within your power. I don't care who your lawyer is. It could be Johnny Cochran, even though he's dead. It's not going to help you. So if you call me for jury duty, I do see that as an opportunity to go in and positively affect the jury, to negatively affect the justice system. And what I mean by that is that in any instance that we have an alleged crime in which there is no victim, there is only one verdict, and that verdict is not guilty, because society cannot be a victim to a crime. There is no society, and I know I'm going to go off on philosophy here, and so people get lost. It's fine, but just stay with me for a minute, folks. Stay with me. Only individuals can act, and only individuals can be victims of force. So therefore, and now I'm not starting with a blank assumption. Now I have a concrete assumption. Therefore, if that is true, only individuals can be victims of crimes. So let's say someone robs someone else of their property. Okay, guess what? You are guilty. You should pay recompense to that party. Mm-hmm. But let's say you got caught with a gram of, I don't know, what are you kids doing these days? Some smack. I'm showing my age.
I hear some of the cool kids in Rush are doing crocodile, which destroys you. But,
yeah, let's do crocodile so we can watch our skin rot off in our blanked out minds. But whatever you kids are doing, if I sell some a kratom dill to you voluntarily, you buy it, we do a peaceful exchange. Now, I'm guilty of a crime because the state says that I'm guilty of a crime. Well, no, you're not, because there is no victim. Mm-hmm. And if I was given the opportunity to sneak my way into that jury pool, and trust me, you give me 15 minutes with a jury, I'll change their mind. But it would be not guilty all day long. If nothing else, it would be hung. And I don't see it as positive activism, and I don't see it as a really effective tool. But what I see it as is an opportunity, as I said, to really throw a sabot into the gears and just trip the state up at every opportunity. And so that's where I'm different on that. I'm like, yeah, do it if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it. That's not what's going to get us out of this.
Very good. Yeah, no, I like your perspective on that. It's obviously different than mine, but yeah, obviously if I'm summoned again and I have the chance to nullify or I don't know, send someone home to their family, I'll do what I can because I'm being coerced anyways, you know. So there's not really there's not really an option. I'm not going to oh, this guy had a couple of grams of marijuana. I want to get home tonight, therefore I want to get home as soon as I can, therefore just send him away for a couple of months. No, I couldn't live with that. So yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. But yeah, we are coming up on about 15 minutes. I really enjoyed the discussion thus far. I guess any closing thoughts for the listeners?
No, I think it's a very interesting conversation that very seldom happens about nullification. So I would just tell anyone who's listening that if you are interested, go check out FIJA.org, Fully Informed Jury Association.org, and take a look at it. And as we do as anarchists, make up your own mind and figure out what you're going to do if you get called. And then take a look at what happened at the Malheur Refuge and what happened to the Bundys, and just ask yourself two questions. One, was it legal? And the answer is no. And then you can say, okay, second question, was it just? And I think that you'll find the answer was yes. And then you have to face the fact that legality does not equal morality. And that is more important in this conversation than anything else, is to just understand the difference between your morals and what law is. And that's all my redemption. That's all I have.
Very good. Yeah, well said. Well said. That was a good succinct conclusion. But thank you so much, Merrick, for coming on the show. It was definitely great having you on. We'll have to have you back on. I'm sure there's a lot of subjects we could delve into. But you can find his podcast at RadicaLogicPodcast.com. Again, that's RAD as in dog, ICALOGIC podcast.com. Thanks so much, Merrick. You have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks. You too, man. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks for sticking around. So we certainly hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Merrick VanLandingham from the RadicaLogic Podcast. Looking forward, I've got some other very interesting stuff planned. First off, you may have seen a particularly vague fascist book post that read, quote, "Well, Liberty Under Attack, Shane and Stan," in all caps, has been mentioned in an FBI investigatory document, specifically FD-302. Caps means person of interest. There will be a post soon with the entire 3 pages, but for right now, I need to make sure I cover my bases first. Laying to rest any concerns, it is just guilt of association. They even fucking quoted me. This is fantastic. Stay tuned, end quote. And it was vague for a reason. After further investigation, the caps may not mean person of interest and may just indicate proper nouns. But anyways, the way I was made aware of my mention is irrelevant, and at the bottom left of the page it says, dissemination limited by court order. To put it simply, I had to find a clever way around those arbitrary restrictions, and I was able to do so. At the time of the publication of this podcast, that article is up, but I do plan on having a podcast episode on that subject in the near future. Secondly, I want to have a cryptocurrency week of sorts. That would include return guests such as Mark Wood and Brian Sovereign, but I still have to get all that lined up and get them contacted, obviously. With my more in-depth knowledge and experience with him now, I feel I could ask better questions and produce better interviews on that subject, which would lead to a better quality production. So that's kind of the goal for the future. I think that's all for right now. If you enjoy the show and want to support us, just visit libertyunderattack.com and use the buttons on the sidebar. We accept one-time PayPal and Bitcoin donations, monthly subscriptions through Patreon and PayPal, as well as we have an LUA store too. Right now, I have LUA Volunteers koozies for sale and the Direct Action series. You can find all of that information at the website there in the sidebar. It's all made very easily available for you guys. Make sure to also sign up for LUA email updates. Just visit libertyunderattack.com/subscribe. You'll get exclusive access to interviews before they are released, free anthologies and audiobooks, and much, much more. I'm still working on getting all of that figured out right now, so if you're already subscribed and have seen a slowdown on emails, not to worry. Things will steady out soon. Stay connected with us on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Google+, and YouTube, whether that is for show or guest recommendations, to call us a bunch of purists, or whatever it is. We always love to hear from you. Just search for Liberty Under Attack Radio on any of those outlets, or again, just consult the website. It's all there. Thanks to Chelsea Gren and their instrumental Elysium for their intro music. And for the outro, we've got a little Triumph. Fight the good fight. Politics has never set the slave free. It's time for direct action. Until next time, laissez-faire. We'll talk to you soon. Triumph, take us out.
Don't get discouraged. Don't be afraid. You can make it through another day. Make it worth the price we pay. The good book says it's better to give than to receive. I do my best to do my part. Nothing in my pockets, I got nothing up my sleeve. I keep my magic in my heart. Keep up your spirit, keep up your faith, baby. I am counting on you. You know what you've got to do. Fight the good fight every moment, every minute, every day. Fight the good fight every moment. It's your only All your life you've been waiting for your chance.